Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm your host, Liz Lang. Each week on this podcast, we will break down various aspects of mental health. We are so excited you're here and hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Jeremiah and Selina Woodruff from Core Connection. And this week we are going to get into Grieving Together. So we're going to discuss how to help teens and even young children as well cope with death, loss, and change. And as many of these topics stem from real life. So I will get into that and I will share kind of where my experience with this comes from or where this topic came from in our family. But first, I have this week's parenting moment yet again because it was just really funny and I wanted to share it. So we just started announcing to the world that we are expecting Lang baby number 4.
Yay!
So, yay! Yeah, so we're very excited. And we told the kids early because, let's be real, they were going to figure it out anyways because I was miserable. I was a couch potato that wanted snacks all day and didn't do much because I felt awful. And so we told the kids, you can't say anything. And so our 5-year-old son comes up to me and he whispers, he goes, "Mom, can I tell Dad about the baby?" and I'm like, "Buddy, Daddy knows about the baby." He's like, "He does, Daddy? You know about the baby?"
Yes.
Yes.
Don't
Yes.
tell Dad.
I know.
Keep it quiet from him.
And then 2 weeks later, he told his entire preschool class. So
Oopsie.
yeah, the secret got out anyways. And we kind of knew it would because 5-year-olds and kids in general, they're terrible at keeping secrets. Anyways, that was my funny parenting moment and maybe an advice. Don't tell your 5-year-old your secrets because it will not stay a secret. They tell people everything.
Absolutely.
Don't-
Without even realizing they're telling them.
Yeah,
Don't tell your 5-year-old if you don't want anyone else to know.
pretty much.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was this week's parenting moment. Okay, so grief. Now, a lot of times when people think of grief, they think of a death. And that is certainly, obviously, grief, and that is a big deal. And that's maybe one of the harder griefs to navigate. But there can also be other grief that can really upend a child's life. So divorce or separation, loss of a friendship, moving or changing schools, illnesses or major life changes. These are all things that can cause grief in kids. And, as parents, we try to do everything we can to protect and to shield our kids. But the reality is it's impossible to shield them from everything. And so change is just going to happen and it's an inevitable part of life. So we're going to get into ways that you can deal with that. So why this is pertinent to our family is, so a few weeks ago, our cat died. And this was very traumatic for our kids because it happened pretty suddenly. He started to get sick and then he wasn't getting better. And so we had to take him to a vet. And the vet said, yeah, this is end stage kidney failure. And so, our best option at this point is just to end the suffering. And my kids have no memory of life without this cat. We got him when our oldest was about 3 years old. And I was pregnant with our second. And we did let them say goodbye. So, because I took him to the vet, and then Curtis brought, when we found out, okay, it's time to say goodbye. Curtis brought the kids to say goodbye, and it was a very noisy and emotional affair. We were crying, the kids were crying, but I feel like it was really important to give them that opportunity to say goodbye and to get those pictures and to get the closure, because closure can be a really important part of grief and helping people move on.
Yeah. The thing about grief is that it's often so complicated. And when we think about grief, one of the real struggles that we see is where it's something the whole family experiences, right?
Yeah.
Divorce or separation, somebody passes away, moving and changing schools, illnesses or other major life changes, those ones that you mentioned, that's some of them. But the struggle is that the parents are experiencing grief in those situations as well, and the challenges associated with that. And so sometimes we're not as aware of what a child might be experiencing or the difficulty they may have in processing what's happening. And so we really need to pay attention to that. It becomes really important.
I love, Liz, that you were able to allow your kids to experience that. I think often, and maybe just for me, I would try to avoid that because I wouldn't want to have all that emotion and deal with it. So it'd be easy to be like, oh, let's just have this happen and explain to them. But that's awesome that you were able to allow them to have that opportunity to experience those emotions and to work together as a family to allow those emotions to happen.
And it did certainly make it a lot harder to have the kids come. And I'm almost sure that everybody in that veterinarian office heard our whole family weeping and wailing from another room. But again, it was important that they get that closure and that they got the chance to say goodbye. And it was also hard for them to see him so sick. And so we did choose not to let them be in the room, right? When they actually put him to sleep. That we felt like was going to be too much for the kids. I mean, maybe our oldest would have been okay with it, but we definitely didn't want our two younger kids to see that. So we just opted to have just me there. But, I mean, I think in that grieving process, I think it has definitely helped them. And my kids have also recently gone through another pretty significant life change. So most longtime listeners of the podcast know that about 3 years ago, my father-in-law moved in with us, and we absolutely loved having him here. Everybody loved having Grandpa, and Grandpa was pretty central to our lives. I mean, he really helped out. He did a lot. He babysat for us, and he very recently moved out. And so that's been another grief that my kids are experiencing and are dealing with and it's not that they're never going to see Grandpa again, right? Because we'll go visit, he'll come visit. He moved to Florida, so it is going to be difficult. We're definitely not going to get to see him as often, but that's still another loss in a sense that my kids are experiencing and that they're dealing with and that we're all dealing with and having to adjust to, of not having Grandpa in the house. And so, these are just the normal ebbs and flows of life that kids and that families often have to deal with.
Most certainly. It's a good experience, I think, for your children to go through this process and have the opportunity to see how you and how Dad responds and kind of what you guys have done, both with losing the cat and having Grandpa move out. Those are difficult things for the children. And, when we talk about grief and loss, I think the number one goal that we should have as parents is making sure that we have that connection with our child, showing the empathy and allowing them to experience whatever they experience. The thing that's so complicated about grief is that we all experience it a different way. And there is a grief cycle. And we're not going to get into that on this podcast, but there's a grief cycle and it's nonlinear. So it's not like one day, you're going to experience this for this amount of time and then this and then that. And, pretty soon we're going to move through it and be able to return to normal life and learn to manage living without an individual or living in a new circumstance or situation. We can go from being mad and angry to just being sad and disappointed to being happy and excited about what the future brings all in one day, and then go back to something different the next day. So just allowing our children, especially teenagers, the reality is they don't know what to do with it.
Right.
Maybe they have a boyfriend break up or a girlfriend break up with them. And that loss for them could be just as powerful and devastating as death for some. And as parents, we can become a little bit unsympathetic, maybe is the way to say that. Because we're like, really? You're 14 years old and your boyfriend of 2 weeks broke up with you. Give me a break. Get over it. Your heart's going to get broken 100 more times before, the schooling is over and you maybe settle down with a partner for life. But for them, man, it's painful. And for us as parents to be understanding and explore those emotions and those experiences with them can help build that connection with our children and help them to be a little bit more emotionally resilient and a little bit more emotionally mature.
I certainly agree with giving kids the space to process and however they're going to process. And they're going to come back to that grief and it's going to crop up. I mean, my kids still regularly say, I miss Scribbles. I miss our cat. And I let them express that. And I think another mistake that sometimes parents can do is they try to make it better or they try to minimize it. Say, oh, yeah, I know, and try to brush it off. We don't want to do that. We want to acknowledge it as long as it takes. Right? I mean, because if and it can take a while and just say, yeah, I know, I understand. I miss him too, is how I respond. And just acknowledging that it is hard and that, as you said, grief is nonlinear and sometimes it can comes in waves. One day they might be doing pretty good and the next day they might just they might not handle it as well. And recognizing that there are things that are going to bring it up. So we paid for a private cremation, which means we got an urn and like a clay paw print. And that was hard. Again, when we finally brought that home, and they love having this memento of him. And again, that's really important to them, but it brought back the sadness and it brought back the tears because it brought it all back and it made it more real. And this is all just a natural, normal part of grief. And it's really important to give kids the space to feel that way. Another strange thing that I think younger kids can do that sometimes can freak parents out is kids will not grieve beyond their capacity, young kids. So it's almost like once they reach a limit, their brain just switches and they act completely fine. And that doesn't mean you're raising a sociopath, I promise. It's just a normal coping mechanism for young kids. So I'll give you a good example of this. We were at the vet and everybody's obviously really upset. And at one point, my 5-year-old goes, everybody, let's just feel better. And what he was saying is he wanted everybody to just stop being in pain. Like he wanted it to stop. He wanted everybody to just flip a switch and just feel better. And that's a very normal thing for kids to do as they're trying to process very complex, difficult emotions. When they need an out, they need an out. And so, that's just very normal part of younger kids' coping mechanisms for grief.
Yeah, most certainly. It's just part of the process, and there's not a right or a wrong way here to go through this. And I think maybe the key here is getting into some of these ways that we can help our kids to process through whatever it is that they're experiencing from the loss, whether that is the death of a grandma or a grandpa, or even a more tragic loss in a car accident or something of that nature. These kinds of things happen and they're going to be a part of our lives, and we can either help our children through that process or we cannot. And the latter is going to yield some more challenging results for them. And so we want to do some good things here for our kids when they're experiencing something like that.
What might not seem natural in these situations, like when you lost your cat or you have a breakup with someone you were in a relationship with, is just going back to normal life. Mm-hmm. And as hard as that is, sometimes having that predictability of life and having the normalcy of life helps to be able to cope with those things and work through emotions and get to a place that you can. So if your kid is involved in any kind of activity like sports or dance or
church activities or any sort of extracurricular
any kind of extra activities, I'm sure that's got to be difficult just to go back to those things. But being able to have that normalcy in your life and to have that connection with other people and interact is in the long run going to help you to be able to bring that more normalcy back into your life.
And that's when they're ready. And every loss, every death, all grief, it's all going to be different. So like, for example, the instance of our cat, we tried to go back to normal life as quickly as possible because yes, we were sad and we let them feel that, we let them have that space to grieve, but it was easy and better for them to just continue going on as normal. Now, if it's maybe a more traumatic death, like the sudden death of a sibling or the loss of a parent, yes, eventually we do want to introduce those routines, but we also need to give kids a chance to be ready. So grief, it can get more complicated than that. But yeah, so routines and predictability, it offers an anchor, and kids thrive on structure. Okay, let's take a quick break and we will be right back.
What's up, guys? Steve here with the Balance of Gray podcast. Do you ever feel like sermons skip the chapters you're living in?
What?
Like church turned into a TED Talk after a concert? Well, at The Balance of Gray, we ask real questions, wrestle with real doubts, and yeah, we leave room for some laughs along the way.
Ooh.
But make no mistake, prophecies are unfolding, and this isn't dress rehearsal. It's the final act. The gospel isn't a vibe, it's a rescue plan. And lukewarm doesn't cut it. From scientific proof to spiritual warfare, this is where faith is not blind. Search The Balance of Gray wherever you get your podcasts and hit follow now. That's The Balance of Gray podcast. I'll see you soon.
Phenomenon is what it is.
They certainly do. And of course, when we're talking about something a lot more traumatic,
Yeah.
Let's put that disclaimer in right here that,
Yes.
we need to seek professional counseling probably for that child,
Yep.
or maybe even ourselves, to make sure that we're processing through that and experiencing that in a way that will be most helpful for our children.
And which was my next point, is you need to be on the lookout for complicated grief, right? Or grief or if your child just doesn't seem to be coping well. And this leads me into a good topic that I want to get your guys' take on. So my 5-year-old has had a lot of trauma, medical trauma, and just change, and just kind of, he's had a lot of health issues. So he spent a lot of time in the hospital, and the poor kid has been through a lot in his 5 years of life. And so I am very well aware that this kid probably does need some child-centered play therapy. And this is my plug for that. So this was something that Dr. Burton and I discussed, as well as his wife, Lindy, that talk therapy is really ineffective for kids under the age of about 11 or 12.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes,
talk therapy just does not work. So if you have a kiddo who is really struggling or who needs therapy, you want to find somebody who is certified in child-centered play therapy. And so that is what we are in the process of working on for my 5-year-old. And this could be a grief thing, or it just could be the myriad of his medical difficulties. And a lot of it just stems from trauma, and he had a lot medically forced on him. And all of it was for his safety. It was all medically necessary. But 3 and 4-year-olds and even 5-year-olds, they don't understand why they have to put this IV in me again, why I have to get my blood sugar checked every 4 hours, and why they have to keep doing all these medical procedures. It can create grief. It can create loss. It can certainly create a loss of autonomy. And I will be the first to admit, the poor kid has had a lot of invasion of his bodily autonomy. So, and where we're at this. So we're in the process of this, but I'm curious what your guys' take is on this bizarre behavior that he is exhibiting. So he's developing attachment to just objects and things. He cannot handle throwing things away, like anything. He will lose his mind. In fact, I mean, and this is a little funny, but we're all kind of going nuts over here. It's not when you really think about it. So there's this dead plant that we have. So last year, our daughter came home from school with the Mother's Day plant, and we put it in our garden bed, and that thing flourished. And she named it. She called it Reese, and then it died, and we just kind of left it in the soil to just kind of break down and give nutrients to the soil, right? Mm-hmm. We keep putting this dead plant back in the soil because every time we try to remove it, he loses his mind and goes into a blind panic. And so I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are on this, if this is just part of his grief, or if you guys have any thoughts or recommendations on how we can handle with this idea. It's almost like he has an inability to process the grief of losing something that's already dead or that doesn't matter anymore. He just can't handle letting go of it.
Yeah, that could be a lot of different things, Liz.
Okay.
It could be associated with losing the cat and what happened there. It could be associated with other challenges in his life. It could just be a normal part of a 5-year-old who's got something about this plant that he just doesn't want to let go. But I think you're on the right track. Getting him into some play therapy for some help processing, especially the trauma from the medical procedures and things that he's gone through. And exploring if there's other things going on, just to make sure that he's doing okay and he's working through those things in a healthy and productive way that will allow him to continue to develop and learn about the experiences of life that we all go through.
Right. Well, and because there's other unhealthy attachments, so our TV went out, and we had to buy a new TV, and he lost his mind. He had a full-on meltdown over throwing away a TV that did not work. And it didn't matter how much we explained to him that this TV does not work. He had a meltdown and did not want us to throw out the TV. And then the same thing came with his sister's old bike. It was his sister's bike, and it was an old bike, and it was just time to throw it out. He had a meltdown. He's never ridden this bike. He has no emotional attachment to this bike, but he's apparently attached to this bike. And so that's one of those things that, again, it's just this weird quirk. It's like he just gets attached to things. And anytime we talk about throwing anything out, if it's not food, because food is one thing he doesn't care about, he loses his mind.
Yeah, I really think that exploring that through play therapy will most likely come out what he was experiencing or what he is experiencing and why that's happening. There just could be so many different reasons for that. And most of them are probably just a part of growing up and moving through the developmental cycles that he's experiencing. And, you know, maybe some of his own fears and concerns based on the things that have happened at home or whatever that might be.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's get into practical ideas for how we can help kids through grief in a positive and a healthy way. So one of the things is to maybe invite, but don't force conversation. That I think is a good one. So like, you know, you can say things to them like, hey, how are you feeling about it today? Has anything changed today in your grief process? Or what are you missing most right now about what life used to be like when X was going on? Like, right, when you had this friend or you were in this relationship or when this was going on. So, and if they just kind of shut you down and like, I just don't want to talk about this, give them space to do that. Like, that's okay. But, you know, definitely find opportunities to try to invite those kinds of conversations in.
Yeah, the last thing you want to do is force it, but that's going to be a very natural response for a parent, right? Because we're worried, like they're acting different. You know, maybe they're isolating, maybe they're not engaging in social activities with their friends like they used to. Maybe they're not interested in playing sports like they used to, whatever it might be. And so we start to worry. So we tend to want to try and force that conversation, but we don't want to do that. And if they're unwilling to talk, there's other things we can engage in. We can just share things that we're experiencing and say, hey, you don't have to talk, but I just want to tell you how I feel today and what I'm going through. And, you know, just kind of encourage them. There's things like journaling. If the kid is into that kind of thing, most teenagers have that capacity. Not all of them do, but, you know, we could journal together and kind of write our own thoughts. And mom and dad don't need to read the journal. They need to know that they can write that down privately and that nobody else is going to see that if they want. But, you know, you've got to look for different ways and options and allow them to grieve the way they're going to grieve. Again, you know, if we have like a grandma or grandpa pass away, mom and dad are both going to be grieving for that loss and they're going to have their experiences and the children are going to grieve for that loss. And everybody's going to do it a little bit different. Everybody's going to be unique. You know, I think about a big loss in my family many years ago, and we lost my oldest sister. And everybody kind of dealt with things in such a different way. And nobody was wrong, right? Mm-hmm. It was a very difficult thing. It still is a very difficult thing for a lot of us. It was a very difficult thing for my sister's children. And of course, her husband. And everybody kind of managed it their own way and continues to manage it their own way and have the things that they feel they need to do to manage that. And so allow your teenage children to experience it how they're going to experience it. And don't be afraid to have the conversations with them, but don't try and force it.
This is a perfect opportunity for connection and come from the role of mentor, not lecturing. I'm not telling them how they should do it or how they should experience it, but giving them opportunities to ask the questions that they have and to be there to guide them and ask them again, do you want help? Do you want guidance on this, or just do you want somebody to listen? So using this as an opportunity for connection and to fill that role as a mentor to guide them through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think another thing is, so expect some, especially with teens, expect some isolation, right? So expect them to want some time to themselves to just process on their own. That can be healthy. That can be really normal. But if it gets prolonged, then we might start to get concerned. And that's when we might need to start looking at maybe some intervention, finding someone else for them to talk to if they don't want to talk to mom and dad, seeking professional help, contacting their pediatrician, kind of whatever you have to do. But, and there's also going to be a temporary loss of interest in things. So especially if it's the breakup of a relationship or the loss of a friendship, if there was mutual things that they did together, they're not going to want to do those things right away. And I think that's fine. And, hopefully they can find something else, or they can maybe get back into it after a period of time. But you definitely just expect some loss of interest, and just isolation during this time of grief. And it is important to give them space to do that and to explore and to figure things out for themselves.
Yeah, they definitely need that space, and a little bit of isolation is okay. And everybody kind of functions through isolation differently.
Yeah.
Some people might really be able to recharge when they're isolated and be able to process through it on their own when they can be alone. Some people just don't want to talk about it, and they'd rather just be alone with their thoughts. And so again, it's really allowing them to grieve the way they want to grieve, the way they want to experience it. If it comes from, like a breakup of a girlfriend or a boyfriend or something of that nature, the last thing we want to do is start telling them, hey, just get over it, move on.
Yeah.
Like we don't get over those things. We move forward when the time is right. And we do that in a healthy way. And as parents, we're modeling as we go through this process with our children, even if it's not directly affecting us, like a loss of a friendship from one of them, but we have to model that for them and model what it looks like. And we do that through giving them space and allowing them to have their emotions and experience what they're experiencing. And of course, validating what they're experiencing becomes really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one thought I had that could make grief a little more complicated, and that could be like a divorce. That can be especially difficult because the parents are also really grieving the end of a relationship. And we've said this before. I would say most of the time in instances of divorce, you really could use some professional help, especially for young kids. They would really benefit from talking to somebody, outside of mom and dad to help them process in a healthy way the emotions of a divorce and that complete loss of normalcy and that complete change of structure and routine in their life. But it can be especially hard to validate a child of what they're feeling when it's also painful for you. So maybe a child wants to talk about, I miss that time when we were all together and we were all living in the same household. It could be really hard for a parent to validate that because maybe they're not feeling that way. Tell me your guys' thoughts on that, on how you could handle a situation like that when it is complicated for everybody involved.
Professional counseling, for sure. Even if you look like at a divorce, and let's say, which is pretty rare, but let's just say for the sake of this podcast, that it's a perfect scenario, right? Where it's a very, non-confrontational separation. Mom and dad just decided, we're done. There's no yelling and screaming, but, this isn't going to work any longer. We're going to separate. We're not even going to involve the courts. Like we'll share custody. We're going to live close by. Mom and dad are super agreeable. They co-parent well. They do all of the right things, right? To give the best potential outcome for their children. What their children are making that divorce mean about them, they will probably never share with you. Yeah. Especially teenagers. And this podcast is about teenagers and those relationships. So, give them the opportunity to get professional counseling, to talk to somebody outside of the family circle that could help give them perspective and direct their experiences through that loss, because it's going to be challenging for them. It's not going to be simple.
I think it's okay to realize that you don't have all the answers, but what you can do is be there for them and be there emotionally and listen and have empathy for them and what they're experiencing.
Yeah. So if you're looking for resources, or if you are not sure where to go, if you are experiencing a complicated grief, or you feel like your child does need additional help, so some resources, you could contact some sort of like DHSH, right? The Department of Health and Human Services. You could also go through a doctor. They can certainly give recommendations for counseling and therapy. their church services, sometimes through certain faith organizations. So there's lots of resources out there. Google will also help you. So, the point is if you're in need of resources, they are out there, they are available, and you can find them. And it's one of those things, if your kid is just dealing with a complicated grief, or if they just can't get past something, get them the help that they need, right? And find out what to do for them.
Yeah, and just to be clear, don't go to Google for getting them help, but use Google
Right.
to find the resources.
Thank you for that clarification.
Let's
yes.
be careful with that one. But certainly Google is great for finding, local counseling centers or other organizations that might be able to provide some relief for your child.
Don't just trust Google on how to manage your child's grief. And again, Google can be a great resource, but I would really, really contact a professional in those instances. Okay, so final thoughts.
I think just realizing that you don't have to fix your child's grief. The grief isn't the problem. There's not a problem here. This is just normal part of life and experiencing emotions in different ways. We obviously need to keep an eye on them and make sure that they're safe and that they're getting the help that they do need. But it's just to be with them and connect with them. And it's not something that needs to be fixed.
Yeah, and I love what Selina said, that we don't necessarily need to fix the problem, but we can be there. And she said earlier too, that, we don't have to have all the answers, and it's okay to share that with our children. I don't know, but this is what I do know. And this is what I'm experiencing. And this is, what I could do for you. These are really key points in a child's life where we can build connection and relationships that will be incredibly strong. And it can really build the trust between a parent and a teen when they experience something hard. If we can just get down in there with them in the trenches and be with them and allow them to experience what they're experiencing and be empathetic and understanding and validate what they're going through, it certainly will build our connection with them. And it's going to strengthen us as parents as well. So great opportunities there.
Yeah, I would also say, add to that, learn to just sit in silence with your kid. Sometimes I think we're afraid of silence, or we feel this need to fill the silence, but you don't always have to. I think sometimes in grieving, it's okay to just sit and cry together, or just sit and say nothing. I think that can be incredibly powerful because it sends a message to your teen or your kiddo. I can handle this grief. I can handle this big emotion, and I can be here for you. I'm not going to run. So, whatever is going to work for your child, know your child and know how to connect with them. Okay, so next week we are going to get into kids and lying, because kids lie, and sometimes it freaks parents out. Sometimes it's a big problem, and we're going to get into it, and we will see you all next time. Have a question? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com.